Hello, and welcome to She Speaks Too, the podcast where we share the stories of African Americans who have made an impact in their communities from the South Carolina Low Country and beyond. I am your host, Patricia Blygen Jones. Join us on She Speaks Too. This is She Speaks To, the podcast, and I'm your host, Patricia Blygen Jones. Today, my guest is United States Congressman James E. Clyburn, Majority Whip and the third ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives, where he currently serves as the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Coronavirus. He is also the chairman of the Rural Broadband Task Force and Democratic Faith Working Group. Congressman Clyburn represents the 6th Congressional District in South Carolina. Good evening, Congressman Clyburn, and welcome to the podcast.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, let's get right to it. Here we are, fresh off another presidential election. And we have a new administration preparing to move into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in January. How are you feeling now that we have the election behind us?
Well, I feel very good about the results of this election. I think that Joe Biden will make a tremendous president. He has the opportunity, I think, to bring this country together, a country that's been divided about race for a long, long time. And race has been the big subject throughout the country over the last several years. Be it law enforcement,
Yes.
be it educational attainment, be it economic development, whatever. Race has been right at the root of it. It's been part of this country's from the very beginning.
DNA.
First African American came to this country in 1619. And of course, this country didn't even give birth to itself until 1776.
Right.
So race has always been a big problem in this country.
So, let me ask you this. Upon hearing the results of last week's election, what were your first thoughts?
Well, I'm very, very pleased because I thought that now we have a chance to get the country back on track. This country has always admitted to imperfections. That's why the preamble to the Constitution reads, in search of a more perfect union, an admission that we will never be perfect, always in search of a more perfect union. And so I thought that the country had been off track for the last several years, and that I was pushing Joe Biden as hard as I was because I thought he gave us the best opportunity to win and to get the country back on track. You know, if you look back over the history of politics, even modern politics, if you can go all the way back to just looking at this thing, Harry Truman was, for all intents and purposes, a Southern president. He is from Missouri.
Right.
And he was the one that integrated the armed services. It was Harry Truman who really, I think, laid out what we call the fair deal, as opposed to Roosevelt's New Deal. Roosevelt was from New York. And the New Deal was not fair to black people in the South. Those jobs, the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, Work Products Administration, those jobs had a little tag hung on them down here in the South, white only. And even land grants and stuff. White people got land and black people didn't. So, you know, Truman, the Southern Democrat, gave us a fair deal. It was Lyndon Johnson, the Southern Democrat from Texas, who gave us the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, Higher Education Act, Head Start, Medicare, Medicaid.
Yes.
A Southern Democrat gave us all of that. And then you come look at Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter appointed more blacks to the judiciary than any other president. Jimmy Carter from Georgia, a
Yes.
Southern Democrat. Bill Clinton from Arkansas, a Southern Democrat. And for all intents and purposes, Delaware, you may look at it on the map, Delaware was a part of the Brown v. Board education decision. That decision that started in Clarendon County, South Carolina,
Yes.
Delaware was a part of that. And so I'm looking for this Southern Democrat. It may not call him a Southerner because of his location on the map, but if you look at it societally or socially, a Southern Democrat. That's where we made all our gains. And I wish sometimes that people, especially black people, just think about it. They get all enamored with these people from the North, but these Southern Democrats that we made all these significant gains on them.
And I think that's the history that a lot of people really don't know. And I think that's something that needs to be shared and talked about more because you're right. There's this tendency to think of people from the North as being, the savior of us all, and that's not
Right.
necessarily true. What's your take on the reaction of the people in this country as well as around the world? We know that there's some people who are just over the moon excited about this new administration, but we also know that there are others who are angry, they're afraid. There are people overseas having celebrations, you know, because of this election. What's your take on that?
Well, in this country, if you just look at the votes, you've got a man who got 75 million votes, more votes than anybody ever got to be president of the United States. Uh, and he beat a guy who got 71 million. And so Joe Biden has gotten 4.5 million more votes than Donald Trump. And any place else, that would be a mandate. But because of this archaic system we got, once again, to protect southern states, we got this electoral college, which says that no matter how many votes you get, it's where you get the votes that really matters. And so you can win a state by 1,000 votes, and you get all of the electoral votes from that state. And based upon the size of the state, will determine whether or not how many electoral votes you get. So what you had 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, but Trump got elected president. George W. Bush got less votes than Gore, than Al Gore, but Al Gore lost the presidency.
Right.
So that system, when I hear Trump talk about is rigged in the system is rigged. It's rigged against people of color. Yeah, it's rigged.
Yes, it is.
He's always trying to transfer to other people that which benefits him. And so, he called it a rigged system. That's all the electoral college is a rigging of the political or the presidential election.
So, Congressman, how do we fix that? I mean, do you think that there's anything that can be done to fix it, to amend it? Does it need to be abolished?
Well, some people are advocating that it be abolished now. I noticed that during this campaign, former President Barack Obama seemed to be implying that this is something that may need to be abolished. I don't know. I have always advocated. When I was elected the majority whip the first time, I was invited back in, I guess it was 2007, to address the South Carolina legislature in a joint session, and I accepted the invitation. And during that speech, I called out for some reforms in the way we do our electoral college. Right now, in Maine and Nebraska, they award electoral votes based upon congressional districts. And here we got 9 electoral votes. You get them by the number of electoral or congressional districts, and each state gets 2 uh, because of the senators. So in South Carolina, we get 9 electoral votes. My idea is that you ought to award 2 to whoever carried the state, and then drill down and see what the rest of them by congressional districts. That way you will always be in the game, or you could always be in the game.
Right.
But they won't do it in South Carolina. So that would be the way I would do it. Barring that, they may ought to just eliminate the electoral college.
Okay. You use the word consequential frequently during this election season.
Yeah.
What events or sets of circumstances drove you to describe the times as consequential?
Well, because I always say that every election is important. School board, city council, county council. In fact, my youngest daughter just got elected to the Richland County School Board here. I don't know why she wants to be on the school board, but she wanted to, and she led
Congratulations
the
to
ticket.
her.
She was very successful at it. Well, it's important. School boards are important. City councils are important. So I never describe one election as being more important than the other. But what I've always said is that some elections have more consequences than others. And I just believe, and I've said this time and time again, I believe that this election this year was more consequential than any election we've had for president since 1860. That's the year that Abraham Lincoln was elected president. And we know what the consequences were that came from that. Right. The Emancipation Proclamation. It came about because Abraham Lincoln got elected. Well, there were 2 proclamations, one freeing the slaves in the District of Columbia, and a second one in the other slave states. Now that ushered in a period called Reconstruction.
Right.
Reconstruction didn't last for 12 years. Reconstruction came to an end in 1877 because of the consequences of an election. Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president by 1 vote. And the consequences that flowed from that was an end of Reconstruction and the beginning of Jim Crow. And I just decided, looking at all of this, I felt that this year, because of what happened 4 years ago, and electing a president who could look in the camera and refer to a black woman as a dog, a president who would look at the first woman of color to be on a national party ticket to be vice president, that he calls her a monster. A president who looked at all of the countries where people of color come from, African countries, basically, he called those countries S-hole countries.
Yes.
This guy was turning the clock back. This is open racism. So to me, we have to get rid of this guy. And so I just felt that this election was very consequential because of that, and maybe the most consequential since 1860. That's why I described it that way.
Okay. Most Americans would agree that this has been the most contentious race in modern history. With tensions remaining at an all-time high, Congressman, do you believe our country will ever be able to come together?
Oh, yeah. Not on a permanent basis. Progress in this country doesn't move on a linear plane.
Right.
This country has always moved right for a while, then it would go back left for a while, then it would go back right for a while. Remember, this country went to the left and elected Barack Obama. 8 years later, the country went way to the right and elected Donald Trump. This year, we're going back to the left and electing Joe Biden. The country's always been that way. You go right down through the history. You will see that the country goes left for a while, then it goes back right, and then it goes back left. But always tell people, remember, when the country is going from left to right, it passes through the center.
Mm.
When it goes from right to left, it passes through the center. So this country, it hangs out in the center twice as much as it hangs out in the left or the right.
Interesting. That's an interesting way of looking at it. What lessons do you think? What lessons can we glean from this election?
Well, that remains to be seen. Um, One of the things we know just from the election is that you got to hold the election. You can't turn on the polling. I've talked to a lot of people who didn't vote 4 years ago because they were so sure that Hillary Clinton was going to get elected, and were remorseful when she didn't. A lot of people this time were saying this was going to be a blowout. I just read a letter this morning that someone sent me several days ago saying, I think it's going to be a landslide. Well, it's not. So I think one of the things that we have to learn is that this whole country is transitioning. You know, you don't have telephones like we used to have. People now use their handheld devices. Many
Right.
of them don't even have landlines in their homes anymore. So the polling is not as accurate as it used to be. People tend to do their own stuff now. They don't rely on the evening news to make up their opinions. All you got to do is look at the internet, the stuff that's out there on the internet. You know that people, by and large, are doing their own thing.
Right.
So the kind of polling we used to do, you can't do anymore. So this election is teaching me that we got to find a different way of the business. Maybe we ought to just stop all the polling and just go out and run these races. And then it remains to be seen as to whether or not the impact socially will be positive or negative. I have enough faith and confidence in Joe Biden to believe that will have a very positive impact on those of us who have been marginalized and denied for so many years.
Well, Congressman, I will say this. I never thought in my lifetime I would ever see a black man become president, let alone a black woman become vice president. And so, how do you how do you let it all sink in? Because I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. I know it on one level,
Yeah.
but I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it because it's almost surreal.
Yeah, and I understand that. And I'll say once again for the people on your podcast, it's kind of interesting. First black man to be president of the United States was a Democrat. Now the first black woman elected vice president was a Democrat. And I just gave you a litany of things that black folks have gotten from Democratic presidents.
Yes.
I would ask you to ask your listeners to give us a litany of things that black folks have gotten in this country from Republicans. And I would say that and remind people when they start looking at and telling you, well, Democrats did this and Democrats did that. There was a transformation in this country. You got to remember, my mother and father were both Republicans. They were members of the party of Lincoln. When I went away to South Carolina State, I thought I was a Republican all the way through 1960. I thought I was a Republican until I saw Richard Nixon and what he did about civil rights issues in the campaign of 1960. And of course, John F. Kennedy defeated him in that election. Now, what you've got to keep in mind is that Strom Thurmond was a Democrat, but he left the Democratic Party over the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
I
When
remember that.
Democrats passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, He left the party, and that was his second time leaving the Democratic Party. He left it the first time in 1948. And you know why he left? Because Truman integrated the armed services. He was mad with Truman for integrating the armed services. So I find it kind of amusing when people tell me all about how great the Republican Party is. If that's what you want to do, fine. But don't tell me that this guy who says he's done more for black people than any president since Abraham Lincoln. Come on.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's a pretty large claim. Tell me, what do you think um, about Ice Cube and a couple other people endorsing that? What are your thoughts on Ice Cube endorsing the platinum plan that the current president created for the black community? Did you ever read it?
no, I never read it,
Okay.
and never will read it. I don't care what you say. I watch what you do. And so all this stuff about a plan, this president refused to adopt a platform. We have always had people running for president of the United States to lay out a platform for the American people. They did not lay out a platform. So you or I could not look at the platform and says, this is something that's good. So if you had a platinum plan, why you didn't put it in the platform?
Right.
So, I look at people when they say these things. I just say, well, sometimes I understand how Democracy felt when he found out that all the stuff that they were doing in the basement of Emmanuel AME Church back in 1822 to free, well, he wasn't a slave. Democracy was a free man.
Right.
He was out there trying to free other people who looked like him, and they told on him. And there was a black guy sitting in the room with him that told on him. So I always remember those things. Robert Smalls was died a convicted felon. It was a black guy who testified in court against him. Everybody knew it was a lie. It was trumped up charges, but it was a black guy that made the record. So I don't I'm disappointed when I hear it, but it doesn't surprise me.
Wow. What is your hope for this country?
My hope is this country will continue its pursuit of perfection. I call it the pursuit. Um, I've always said that, and I've never moved. And all of a sudden, I started getting texts from people in quotes, "the pursuit." The pursuit. I've been getting that all often in the last several days,
Mm-hmm.
and so I just want this country to continue its pursuit of perfection, and that's what we're all about. In pursuit of a more perfect union,
Okay.
the pursuit.
In
That's
pursuit.
all I want for this country is to continue the pursuit.
What advice would you give to young activists forging their way onto the national and political scene?
My advice would be to learn all you can about your history. Don't listen to what people tell you your history is. Learn it for yourself. And so when you have a president, I guarantee you, when this president says I've done more for black folks than anybody since Abraham Lincoln, I think I've said some things here today about some presidents that a lot of your listeners have never heard and never focused on. So I study history daily
Yes.
because what I do, I look at the headlines and I see what's happening. I watch the evening news, read the newspapers, and then I go back and see what can I find in our history that's similar to what I just saw in the newspaper. And then I look and say, well, how did this issue get addressed before?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I build my approach to life, trying to let history instruct me. And so I would say to any young people, look, that's what you do. Learn who you are. And then, as I've said to my children, find something to do for which you are not paid.
Mm.
If you've got a passion for something, get involved in it. Whatever job you're paid to do it well. But beyond that, find at least one thing to do for which you're not paid. And what I think you're going to find is what I have always found, that I have gotten more assistance in my efforts from my involvements that I was not paid for than I have from the involvements that I got paid for. You know, when I set up, my wife and I set up the scholarship fund, um, you know, I just get a great joy out of this golf tournament that I do annually. This past year, though we canceled the tournament, we did not cancel the banquet. We had it virtually. We gave out 175 scholarships to high school graduates. Give each one of them a laptop. Give each one of them a software package.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I do that out of the joys of playing golf. I love golf. So I organized this golf tournament. And I said, oh, let me have fun and help somebody while I'm having fun.
Right.
And so, something to do for which I'm not paid. That's where I get the most joy, is the things I do for which I'm not paid. As I would tell young people, find something to do for which you're not paid. It will pay off for you handsomely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If your parents were alive today, what do you think they would think of your political career?
Oh, they would be very proud. My mother was just a real activist. My dad was what I might call he was a fundamentalist minister, and he was active in the most civic-minded way. But my mom was a big fundraiser for the NAACP. In fact, when the NAACP in South Carolina started its Woman of the Year thing, my mother was NAACP's first Woman of the Year. You didn't get that from no beauty contest. You got that from who raised the most money.
Right.
She was that kind of a fundraiser. She was very active in the 50s when the powers that be was trying to break the backs of the NAACP, and they had to defend themselves in court. My mom was a big fundraiser for getting the money to defend the NAACP. She would be very proud, very proud.
Good. And now I see your children following in your footsteps. Well, at least one so far.
One so far, well, I think Mignon has done. My oldest has done politics in a different ways. You know, she
She
was
has.
a Obama appointee to the Federal Communication Commission. She stayed there for 9 years, and they've been back to her. This the Biden people have been back to her about coming back into government. I don't think she's going to go though.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the youngest just got involved uh, in elective office. My middle daughter, Jennifer, uh, is ran my campaign for re-election, and she's now working down there in Georgia, uh, trying to do what she can do to win this runoff down in Georgia. She's very active in politics. She's very active in my efforts, and there are a lot of people who think that I ought to retire so she can be the congresswoman. I might look at doing that.
Yeah, I read about that.
Mm.
Do you think once the dust settles, once the president gets through exhausting all of his you know, all of his legal means of getting past the election, do you think the two parties will be able to come together and work together? I mean, will they? Can there be a bipartisan, you know, coalition to get things done? There's so many things that need to be done. Our infrastructure, our bridges, our roads, the corridor of shame off of 95. There's so many things that need to be done, Congressman. Do you think these things can get done once we get past all of
Yes,
this?
I don't think there'll be any permanent alignment, but I think that there will be times when the parties will come together uh, to fix a road here, a bridge there, put in broadband over here, develop some new hospitals over there, and broaden our educational system in one area or another. But I don't think there will be, in my lifetime anyway, any kind of permanent alignment along those lines. But yes, I think they'll get together periodically for the good of the country.
Yes. Have you had a conversation with President-elect Joe Biden and Vice
Yes,
President-elect Kamala Harris?
no, well, Kamala called me this morning.
Okay.
I didn't know it until I listened to a message, and Joe called me Saturday night. I didn't know because I was just kind of busy. I wasn't retrieving all my messages, and so I looked down and I had 90 some odd messages that I had not listened to. And so this morning, as I was coming into Columbia from Santee, where I had spent the weekend, um, I started listening to the messages. And Joe called and left me a message Saturday night. I'll call him back in the next several days and let him know I didn't ignore him. I just was busy doing something else. And I'll call Kamala tonight, I think. She just said she called a chit chat. She didn't call for anything special.
Oh, that's nice. So in political circles, you're known as the Kingmaker. Does it make you bristle when you hear that?
Yes, it does, because I don't see myself that way at all. I saw myself as being one who needed to heed my wife's instructions to do what I could for Joe Biden, and one who listened to the request of Mrs. Jones sitting on the front seat of that church in St. John's Baptist Church down there in Lower Richland, when she told me that this community needed to hear from me on the subject of who should be the next president. And she wanted to hear from me. So that's all I was doing, responding to requests of me. I think I'd be less than a good congressman if I knew my constituents wanted me to act a certain way and vote a certain way, and I go and do something different. Um, Everybody asked me why I gave such an emotional endorsement of Joe Biden. That's why. It's because of my late wife and my current constituents. It's why I was so emotional about it. I
Yes.
was always going to vote for Joe Biden, but I could have been quiet and voted for him, and I don't think anybody would have been upset with me except my constituents.
Right. What do you think we can do as a community to foster a conversation, a true conversation about race in America?
Well, I think that it's very difficult for people to accept the fact that their notions are not the be all and the take all. I think it's kind of hard for people to accept, that our congressional districts are different. Um, you take the 6th congressional district and the 1st congressional district. I share 6 counties with Joe Cunningham, who just lost his election by 4 points, and he's running for re-election. Now, that district is totally different. We got the same counties, but my part of these counties are much more sort of what we might call progressive or liberal than his part. You see, I don't have this whole thing about liberal and conservative, because my dad was a very conservative guy, but he was when he asked for election on Sunday, he didn't ask his congregations to give conservatively. He asked them to give liberally. So I grew up thinking that there are times to be conservative and there are times to be liberal. We have to have balance in our lives. If you're all conservative 100% of the time or liberal 100% of the time, there ain't no balance in your life.
Right.
Put balance in your life. So that's just the way that I function. I'm not too sure if it works often enough for people, but that's the way I function.
Your hometown, Sumter, South
Yeah.
Carolina. Native son, you've gone off, you've done well.
Well, Sumter was a great place to grow up. You know, I tell people that of all the addresses I've had in life, every one of them has been in the 6th Congressional District. Sumter, born and raised, Orangeburg College, Charleston, where I started my life teaching in the public schools. And Emma and I lived in Columbia before we went down to Charleston.
Yes.
I lived in the same neighborhood that I live in now. And when we moved into the Greenview area after we moved to Columbia from Charleston, we never left the street that we live on. I'm still in the house that we bought. And every address I've ever had, be it Charleston, Orangeburg, Sumter, 6th Congressional District of South Carolina. It's who and what I am. I've traveled a lot. Two of the most memorable events I've ever had in my life, for strange reasons, were the 2 times I was in Ghana and stood in that so-called
Door of no return.
Of no return.
Yes.
I stood there the first time with Emily, my late wife, and the second time with Jennifer. Jennifer and I went there to celebrate the 400th anniversary. And the reason I wanted to do that, because when I told Emily I was going back to Ghana for the 400th anniversary, and I says, I'm looking forward to the trip. And she said something about having been to Ghana, and she talked about a luncheon we had there with a young lady who was the ambassador there, who used to teach at Voorhees College. And I said, well, you know, that was the day after we, or the day before we stood in the door of no return. She said, what are you talking about? And I told her about that. Now, I don't know whether it's her illness or whether she just wiped it out of her mind. She told me she never remembered doing that, but she remembered being in Ghana. She remembered the state lunch we had, but she never remembered standing in that door. So I wanted to take Jennifer there so she could experience what it was like. It's mind-boggling to stand in that door, just to visit those so-called castles, which were really dungeons, and the stench is still there. That's a tough trip to take.
A tough trip. You lost Miss Emily a year ago. Your soulmate of 58 years. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. The daughters are great. We've got real good friends who make sure that I never miss a meal, though I should miss some. I do have just a great set of friends. I have my staffs are just good people. They all have been family. And I got the same group that I play golf with every weekend that I do golf. And, you know, I'm doing okay. Miss Emily a lot, but
Yeah.
she's in a better place. Diabetes was a tough existence, and she lived with it for almost 30 years.
That's tough, and a great loss and a great love story. You know, when I was doing my research and going over your time at South Carolina State, um, and the experience of being locked up during the Orangeburg massacre, you all have been through a lot together,
Yeah,
and
yeah, we did
yeah,
go through a lot together. We were tremendous partners. Um, Emily, this may sound strange, but Emily never missed calling an election, even the ones I ran in. I'll never forget when I was running for Secretary of State, and it was getting close to Election Day back in 1978. She came home one day, and we were sitting down over the dinner table. She said, "Now, Clyburn," she never knew my first name. She said, "I don't want you to get too up about this election. You're not going to win this election. Um, so you need to get prepared for that." Um, you know, and she was right. I didn't win. So in '92, when I was running for Congress, we sat down one day, and I told her, I said, Bill DeLoach, who was my campaign manager, wants to do a poll. And the campaign is short of money. I need to borrow some money to get this poll done. And she said to me, "You'll be wasting money because you don't need to do a poll. You just keep doing what you're doing. You got this campaign won."
wow.
Um, that was 3 weeks out. And if you remember, there were 5 people in that race,
I do recall.
and I was not expected to win that race, according to a lot of people. But when the election was over, I had 56% by my lonesome, and the other 4 people that had 44. Emily never missed calling a race. Everyone she ever told me, she called it right.
Well, you stated earlier that she was a very big supporter of
Yeah.
President-elect Joe Biden. So I'm
Yes,
sure she is pleased with the result.
that's exactly right. She called this one too.
Wow. Congressman Clyburn, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And we,
Appreciate you.
sure, no problem. Be good.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us this week on She Speaks Too. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook at She Speaks Too. As always, subscribe to the show to catch every new episode and leave us a review so we can continue to bring you fresh content. See you next week.